So thankful that you decided to spend some time with me today. Now, today, the plan is to play with some acrylic paints as well as a monoprinting plate. But I have a small, tiny little confession to make. I am reasonably new to acrylic paint. And what I mean by that is that I am a mixed media artist, and normally my mediums of choice include metal and resin and fiber and plastic and everything and anything. However, paint was always kind of a side note for me. It wasn't something that it was never really a focal for me. And then about a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to really dive deep into acrylic paint, and I did exactly that. So I started playing with different brands out on the market. I started figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like. And I started figuring out the different types of viscosity paints and all of that. And I ended up landing on Amsterdam acrylic paints. So my hope for today's lesson is that I am going to share some pretty simple and basic monoprinting techniques with you, but I also hope to share some helpful information that I found helpful when I was first really diving deep into acrylic paint and why I ended up landing on Amsterdam acrylics. So I hope you're excited. Sit back, relax, and of course, if you have any questions, let us know. But I think it's time. I'm going to explain what we're going to be doing, what I'm using to do it, and then we're going to have some fun. Okay. So, Pamela, if you could switch that camera over for me. Hi, guys. Hello. Okay. So today we are actually going to be making small journals, and we're going to be making them by first creating some monoprinting plates. And we're going to create these monoprints using multicolored papers. We're going to use textures and, of course, Amsterdam acrylic paints. Now, the items that I'm going to use, we'll take a better look at these in just a little bit. But the items that we're going to use is I have an 8x10 monoprinting plate. I also have a brayer. I'm going to take a black piece of cardstock and I'm just going to put it off to the side here. And what that's going to do is it's just going to remove any of the excess paint that I accumulate on my brayer. And we're also going to be using multicolored cardstock today. And we're going to be using some black as well as some natural and some white cardstock. Now, normally when you're first starting out with monoprinting, people like to reach for that white, and it's totally understandable. Your colors pop off the page, they're vibrant and colorful. I'm more of a grungy girl, so I actually prefer to use a black cardstock. And I feel like it gives my monoprints a little bit more dimension. They're grungier. But honestly, when it comes to monoprinting, any substrate will work that's reasonably flat. You can use a piece of cardboard or a piece of plastic. Anything that's reasonably flat that you can press onto the plate will work perfectly fine. Now, as far as textures, today I'm going to be using some of my foam stamps for textures as well as some of my stencils. But like paper, anything that you have around you that you can use as a texture will work. I promise you, if you look around your desk right now, you'll find about 4 or 5 different textures that you can use on this plate. Anything will work. And that's one of the things that I love about monoprinting. And as I mentioned, today I'm using a 24 pack of Amsterdam acrylic paints. So I'm going to move this out of the way for a sec. I chose to use this particular set because it is the first set that I tried when I started playing with Amsterdam acrylics. And I really enjoyed it because there's a lot of colors to choose from. There's 24 colors in here. They're 20 mil, and I appreciated the size because it allowed me to test the colors. And also, if I liked it, then I would invest in a larger size. I really did enjoy that. But there's 24 different colors in this pack. But Amsterdam All Acrylics actually comes in 90 gorgeous colors. So there's a lot of colors to choose from. So I'm going to go ahead and just open these up and put these in my little bin here so that I have them ready to monoprint. And I'll put them off to the side. And I want to talk a little bit about Amsterdam acrylics, as far as why I chose them and why I landed on Amsterdam acrylics. Now, as far as the packaging, this is actually a clear tube. And so the color that you see on here is the paint. And that I find that extremely helpful. As far as the name, it's listed right on this label right here. I don't know if you guys can see that. There's also a color number. There's a little square that represents the opacity, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. And there's a bunch of little plus signs, and that represents the degree of light fastness. Now, when I was first starting out, I'll admit I looked at the label. I had no idea what a lot of this stuff meant. And so when I found out what it meant, I just thought it was such valuable information. I felt like I made a video about it. I wanted to share it with people because if you're new to paint, this is stuff that you really want to pay attention to because it's really going to help you while you're creating. And so when we look at that opacity square, there are 4 different types of opacity. And so if you have a hollow square, just like on this primary magenta paint, it means that this paint is going to be transparent. If you have a square that's hollow, but it has a line going through it, it means that this is a semi-transparent paint. If you have a square that is filled in, it means that this paint is opaque. And if it's half filled in, it means that it's semi-opaque. So I found that to be extremely useful because I really love playing on a black or dark substrate. So you can see here, this color right here, it looks like this beautiful pink color, but if I put it on a black surface, that's what it's going to look like. And if that's what you're after, then great, but it's good to know ahead of time. So if you want to lighten it up a bit, you can mix in some titanium white or another color. And so you have that option if you understand if it is a transparent color or not. So that's the transparent one. This is the semi-transparent. Here's the opaque. And that's semi-opaque. So I find that to be extremely useful. And a lot of times when I'm painting on a canvas, I end up painting it with a black gesso. So I really do enjoy starting with a black substrate. But even if you are using just a toned paper or a light color, it's still extremely useful to understand that opacity. Something else I wanted to mention on here is that also on the barcode, there's a list of pigments that are used, which is also really good to know. This AP on the back represents that it's non-toxic. And there's some other stuff on there, but those are the things that I think really helped me when I was first starting out. Now, when I first got that set, one of the first things that I did was I created this chart, and it's probably one of the most used things in my studio because I refer to it time and time again. And so I ended up adding the color number and the name, and then I added a little swatch of the paint tube directly from the paint tube on both white and black cardstock. And then I also added a swatch on the black cardstock of that color mixed in with a little bit of titanium white. And I find this to be extremely useful. So if you do work on a black surface, this is a great idea because like I said, I look at it multiple times whenever I'm picking up my acrylic paints.
And Kat, there's a
Yeah.
question here regarding the pink tube that you showed that's transparent. What would you add to it if you wanted it to show up the way it does in the bottle? If you
I would add a little bit of titanium white, which will lighten the color, but you have other options as well. You can use a like a buff color, a light buff color, which is also opaque, and that will help that color to show up a little bit as well. And so you can definitely play with different types of lighter opaque colors to get one that you like. But for me, it's very useful to know because sometimes I want to achieve this look and sometimes I don't. And so I want to know ahead of time about that opacity. And so, you know, mixing the colors with other opaque colors is an option. Okay.
Thank you for that. And just one more quick question here. Do you know
Sure.
what's the difference between semi-opaque and semi-transparent?
Mm. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that the semi-opaque, to me, it feels like it's a little bit richer. The color, this is right here. This is the semi-transparent and the semi-opaque. I don't know what the actual properties are as far as what the difference is, but like just looking at them on here, they look similar. But to me, this one looks a little bit richer, like it has more pigment in it. Okay, but I'm not sure. But what I can do is I can jot down this question afterwards and I can find the answer for whoever's asking and I'll put it on my Instagram page. Okay.
Thank you. Amazing.
Okay, so one last thing that I wanted to talk about this paint, and this is the number one reason why I love this paint so much. Besides the color options and the opacity, my favorite characteristic about this particular paint is that it is a medium viscosity paint. And so viscosity meaning just the thickness of the paint. Okay, so if you are familiar with, let's say, a heavy body paint, that's more of like a margarine spread. So if you take your knife and you put it through the margarine, that heavy body paint is going to retain its form on your palette knife. It's not going to change. And as you can see, this one is also retaining its shape, but it's more of a medium viscosity, so it will self-level. But what I love about it is just that it is buttery smooth, and I really love using it because it is just so smooth to work with, and especially on a mono printing plate where I'm going to take a brayer and I'm going to go back and forth. I really don't want any resistance on that. I don't want anything to clump up. And so this works beautifully on the mono printing plate, but of course, it's a wonderful paint for other projects as well. But this to me is the number one reason why I picked this paint. Okay. So now that I've given you a little bit to chew on as far as why I chose Amsterdam acrylics, we're going to go ahead and get started. And one of the first things that I am going to do is I'm going to make some monoprints using one piece of black cardstock, one piece of white, and one piece of natural color cardstock. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to share my train of thought when I'm actually creating, because the color of the cardstock is going to help determine the colors that I pick to use. Okay. And as I mentioned in the beginning, using white, you can use any type of opacity paint. You can use a transparent, you can use an opaque, semi-opaque, but and that's why it looks so good on white. But when you're using darker colors, you have to think a little bit about what you want to add to your paper. And so I'm going to start off with this natural color. And in order for my acrylic paint to show, I'm going to reach for either an opaque or a semi-opaque color. All right, so I'm going to go. Now, I know these are really small, so you might not be able to see the opacity indicator, but these two are opaque, semi-opaque. I think I'll go with those two. And when you're monoprinting, you really don't need a lot of paint. I have a horrible habit of adding too much paint, and I try I try not to do that, but for some reason I just end up really adding way too much. So I'm going to just spread it out. Now, as you can see, my monoprinting plate is a mess. It's got stuff all over it. I rarely clean my monoprinting plate because I like to see everything that's underneath it. I like all of those pieces that are underneath it to come up on some of my prints. So I put my stencil down. Now I'm using that natural color. And I'm going to take my brayer and I'm going to just roll it on the back so that it really gives it a nice even pressure so that I can pick up all of that color. All right, and so you can see how nice and vibrant that is. It's really popping. And, you know, if I chose to use a transparent color, that would have been totally fine too, but I would have known what to expect. And I think that's what I'm really trying to get across is that you want to have an idea of what it's going to look like so that you're happy with your results. All right, so once I remove my stencil, I'm still left with this design on here. And I don't know if you guys can see it. Okay, but it's still on there. And so the next page I'm using is the black. So now I need to think about how do I get this to stand out on this black surface? Okay, so these were opaque colors. Okay, so I can use another opaque on top of that and then pull a print and it will really stand out. Or I can use more of a transparent color and it will be more muted. So let's see what we have in our box of goodies. I think I'm going to go for this, a permanent red violet. Okay, it is a transparent color on black, but I know what to expect. All right, at least I hope I do. So I just added a little bit. And what I'm expecting to see is just a hint of color. And the paint is definitely drying quickly, and it will depend on your climate. If you are in a humid area, it will your paint will take a little longer to dry. But right now, it's actually drying very quickly. Okay, so you can see, I don't know if you guys can see that. The color is very dark, and that's this one right here, but it's exactly what I expected it to be. And I can still see all of the little lines from the other opaque colors that I added. Okay. So now I'm going to move to a white piece of paper. And again, when I'm working on white, I really don't even think about what opacity paint I'm using because they all work. So I'm just going to pick out some cool colors. Well, that one's a little warm, but let's see. And I also have a scrap piece of paper off to the side that I use to pick up excess paint. And I'm going to use that in just a second so that I can get a full print. So let's go ahead and we'll use this one. I have a scrap piece of paper. I'm calling it a scrap piece of paper, but I rarely throw these out because these are really great for collage. And so I pick up excess paint on these, but I save them for collage later on. So I'm left with a little bit of color right there. And now I'm going to add another color on top. I'm not really paying attention if it's opaque or not because I'm using a white substrate.
And Kat, would you
Yeah.
mind talking a little bit about your stencils, choice of patterns, where you
These are actually, these are my stencils from Stencil Girl products. I've designed all of the ones that I'm using today, as well as the foam stamps. So you can find them all on stencilgirlproducts.com. Just making sure that that color transfers on there. Okay. Now, I love this edge right here. Of course, this plate is only 8 by 10, and this piece of paper is larger. I am totally okay with that, but any size monoprinting plate will work for these techniques. It doesn't really matter. Even if it's a small plate, you can also, move it around and add it to different areas of your substrate. But these are 3 different prints. And I just wanted to give you some insight on really the way that I'm thinking about my acrylic paints and how to use them depending on the substrate that I'm using. But like I said, I always gravitate towards the black. I just really feel like it gives it such a richness. But they all look absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, I love that. Okay. So now I want to talk about using the color of the substrate to your advantage, letting it peek through. Okay. And I think that that's also one of the reasons why I gravitate towards a black. So normally, like I showed you a few minutes ago, I would put some acrylic paint onto my plate and then I would spread it out with the brayer and then I would put my stencil on top. But if I want my design, if I want to see some of that black cardstock, I'm actually going to do it a little differently. I'm going to place my stencil on the plate and then I'm going to add the color on top of it. And this will create a space where all of the lines of the stencil are, so you can see some of that black. And I like doing this for a couple of different reasons. I'm going to mix some of these colors. Again, it's drying really fast. So I'm going to mix some of these colors, but I like doing this because I like the option of having that black line so that I can add additional elements to that line and give the monoprint a little bit more more texture. And I'll show you what I mean. So you can see all of that black peeking through. And this is what I mean. I don't know if you guys can see, but here's another one that I created where I filled in some of those black spaces with just a jelly roll pen or anything. You can use gold and fill it in, but you still want some of that black to shine through. And I really feel like it just adds such a beautiful touch to be able to use the color of the substrate to your advantage. Now, if you're using a white piece of cardstock, what I like to do is I will also add texture Let's see, I'm picking out another stencil here to use. So I'm going to, again, place my stencil first. And what colors do I want to use here? Let's go with these. Now, because this stencil has quite a bit of open space, it's going to allow me to add texture in between the spaces. And I'm going to add that texture using one of my foam stamps. Now, everybody likes to monoprint differently. They like to mix their colors completely. I am more of a grungy person, so I don't normally like completely mix all of my colors. Okay, now I don't know if you guys can see that the design of that foam stamp is now in that acrylic paint. So I'm going to let that dry for just a little bit. And I'll also mention that whenever you are using acrylic paint on either a rubber stamp or a foam stamp, you want to make sure that you are cleaning your stamps after you play with them. Right now, I actually have a water bucket right next to me, and I'm going to throw this in there so that when I'm done with my play session, I can go back and I can clean my stamps because I don't want that acrylic paint to dry on the surface of my foam stamp. All right, so that should be good. So I think I will use some of this yellow. It might be a little wet. Nope, let's try it. Now, again, I'm using a white substrate, so I'm not really paying attention to the colors that I am choosing, except that I think they work well together. It feels like it's already dry. Wow.
And Kat, it seems you cleaned the foam stamps right away. How about your stencils? How do you go about cleaning them?
Okay, my stencils, I don't normally clean. I don't mind the texture on the stencils. However, if I am using a modeling paste or some kind of medium that's thick through a stencil, then I will clean it right after my play session. But if I'm just using acrylic paint or acrylic inks, I normally do not clean them. Okay. And so now you can see a little bit of that additional texture anytime you have a nice open space inside, in between the stencil lines. You can go in with a foam stamp or a rubber stamp or anything that you have to create texture. And I think that looks pretty awesome. Okay. Now, one of the things that I love to do most when it comes to monoprinting is I have a technique that I call just patchwork quilting monoprinting. And what that means is that I am going to monoprint onto 3 pages at once. And so I'm going to take 3 pieces of black cardstock. And I'm going to pick a handful of colors that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go with some blues. Maybe some of that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a print on my plate, and I'm going to not pull a full page. Instead, I'm only going to pull a small section for each one at a time until I completely fill up my page. And I enjoy doing this because it really allows me to use all of my supplies. And honestly, I just love the way it looks when I'm demoing at a trade show. It's one of the demos that I like to do. Now I'm going to use my scrap paper to pick up that excess paint. Now it's okay that it didn't pick all of it up. I'm totally okay with that. And then I'm just going to add a second color on top of that stencil.
And Kat, do you happen to know the weight of the cardstock that you're using today?
I believe it's 60. I'm not 100%. I got it just at the local craft store. So I think it's a 60. So now I have this print on my plate here, and normally I do this in thirds. And just like before, I'm pressing it down, making sure that it's firmly making good contact with my plate. There's 1, 2, and 3. Now I'm going to use these same colors in a different way, okay? So I'm going to, let's see, I started with the blue before, so now I'm going to start with the green. I'll take another stencil. This time I'm just going to wipe some of that color off, remove my stencil, and I'm left with the print. So now I'm going to decide where I want to place it on here. So I'm just eyeballing it, trying to figure out where to place it. I have some right here, so I'm gonna. I have this little space right here, and I think I'm going to use that right here. I just have so much fun doing this because it's like you're making 3 pages at once. And honestly, it forces you to not think so much. And that's what I like about it. Now let's switch things up a little bit. Here I'm using a transparent color on the black surface, but I want it to be a little lighter. I want to make sure that I can see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mix it with a light opaque color. So I'm going to pick this one, which is Naples Yellow Deep. Now that's going to change my color a little bit, but I'm okay with that. Take one of my stencils. I'm going to remove that excess. Again, I save these. And now I have this color on here. So how am I going to make that stand out on that black surface? I'm going to use this color again, just by itself. Now I'm going to figure out where to place this. Let's see. If they overlap, in certain areas, I'm okay with that. I'm not looking for perfection here. I am just having fun. And it's just, I'm not really being too precise about it.
And question here, Jill's wondering, do the colors need to dry between layers?
They do, and I am working pretty quickly because my colors are drying so fast. So it's okay for me to add that paint right on top of it. But if you're at home and it's taking your colors some time to dry, you want to wait for them to dry and then add your second color. Okay, I have a little bit right here. I'm going to also add that. If it's not too dry, let's see. Okay, awesome. All right, and I think I'm just going to do one more because I just have this area right here to fill, and I have this area. So I'm going to take, let's go with this color. This is a semi transparent. And I'm going to mix in some opaque titanium white. Now, some people like to just go in one direction. Again, you know, they like to really mix out those colors, make sure that there aren't any blotches. That's totally up to you, whatever you want to do. Now, this paper that I'm using right here to pick up my scrap, the leftover paint, this is just regular copy paper. And like I said, I always keep it because it is thinner. It's copy paper, so it actually works really great for collage. There's a lot of that color left on the plate, and I'm okay with that. It's pretty grungy. And like I said, normally I would wait for this to dry, but just looking at the paint on a slant, I can tell most of it is already dry. I'm going to fill up this space right here. I have a little bit right here, so I think I'm going to try to get that area. I'm only putting pressure on the area that I'm trying to pick up. I like that. Very nice and grungy. Got a little bit of paint right here. It's picking up some of the layers from underneath, which is why I don't clean my plate, like I said before, because I like to see those layers. If you clean your plate after each play session, that's totally up to you. I mean, some people like to do that. I like to have some of that grunginess left over on my mono prints. And so this is what my 3 pages look like. They're muted because they're on that black surface, but they are full of texture. There's multiple different, different designs on here. I am totally okay with this black peeking through because I can go in afterwards and start adding my finishing touches and everything. So I'm okay with all of this being exposed. And so this is what the 3 pages look like, okay? And so when it comes to finishing touches on my mono prints, I'm going to push this aside for 1 second. And when it comes to finishing touches, what I like to do is I don't like to overcomplicate it. I don't want to add too much because there is already quite a bit of texture on here. And so what I like to do is this is where my foam stamps will come in. And I like to take one design and just add it in a certain areas. And depending on the color of the cardstock, will determine the color that I use on my foam stamp. And so, for example, since these have that black, I use the black cardstock, I'm going to use a light opaque color on my foam stamp. If I was using white cardstock, then I would probably go with a darker, deeper color. So I'm going to add some of this color right here to my foam stamp. And I'm going to add finishing touches to these 3 final prints. I'm just spreading it out with the brayer. And normally whenever I add the design, I add it in 3 areas of the print. Okay. And you can pick, I mean, if you don't have foam stamps, of course, you can use rubber stamps. You can, draw the additional elements on your page in order to add your finishing touches. It just doesn't need a lot. And whenever I'm done adding my foam stamp, I always, always, always finish with a black or a white. And what I mean by that is I will add either black splatters or white splatters, depending on what the page needs. One more. All right, I'm going to throw that foam stamp into my bin with water, and I'm going to pull out some white acrylic paint. And I'm just going to water it down just a little bit. If you have ink at home, you can use white acrylic ink. Amsterdam acrylic ink is one of my favorites. It's just the grunginess in me. I have to add splatters. And then what I would do is just put these off to the side and let them dry. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we definitely have some questions here in the chat.
Okay.
So once once these prints are dry, are they done, or do they turn into other pieces of art? Do they become larger works, or how do you use your prints?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to actually put these aside, and I'm going to use 3 that are already dry, and we're going to create that small mini journal that we were talking about earlier at the beginning. And that's one way to use them. I found that when I first started monoprinting, I would end up with such a huge stack of monoprints, and I needed to figure out ways to use them. And so creating these small journals for me was just such a great option to doing that. And so hold on one second. I'm going to grab some that are already dry. So I created these before today's lesson. I used a different color, different kind of a different color scheme. But I also used a different color on my foam stamp. And so these are ready to go. And, I can use them in the journals. Like I said, I can also cut them up and use them in cards, or I can also collage them onto a canvas. There's definitely a lot of options. One of the things that I also like to do is I make assemblages. And so I will cover the inside and the outside of the assemblage with my monoprints because there's already so much texture on them. They work great for that option. So
Thank
now
you.
when it comes to, was there another question?
Yeah, there are a couple more questions here. Do you ever use fabric instead of cardstock?
Most definitely.
Maybe we'll
Yeah,
have you back for a demo on fabric sometime, Kat.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the great thing about the mono printing plate. You can use anything that is reasonably flat. I've used muslin, I've used felt, even used lace to create actual texture on the plate. So there's a lot of options with fabric for sure.
And on the topic of materials and experimenting, have you experimented with rice paper?
I have actually, and I have my own line of rice paper with joggles.com. And so some of the designs that I have with joggles were created on the monoprinting plate. So there's definitely, the nice thing about rice paper is that it's a pretty durable substrate, and yet it's delicate at the same time when you tear it, and it has these beautiful fibers. But you can create a beautiful print on it with no problem. It soaks up that acrylic paint really nicely.
Thank you for that. And with the
Mhm.
brayer, do you have any tips for just keeping the brayer clean, or do you just use your side paper?
I use the side paper, but it doesn't really matter. Over time, it's going to accumulate quite a bit of, gookiness. And so, every once in a while, I will let it soak and let that acrylic paint soften up. And then I just peel it. I do like using this particular brand because it's got a rubber thing on it. And so it really does tend to last for a long time. And not only that, they come in different sizes. So I'll be the first to admit that I'm kind of obsessed with this brayer. It's a nice heavy duty one, and I just try to keep it clean as much as I can. And every once in a while, I'll clean it in the sink with some soap and water.
Thanks, Kat.
Hmm. Okay, and so we're going to go ahead and take the three pages that we created. Well, these are the ones that were already dry, and we're going to create this journal. And like I said, I'm always desperate to find, it's a speedball brayer, just so you know. Um, I'm always desperate to find different options for my mono prints. And so the first time I made one of these, I was like, this just can't be any easier. And what I like to do is, I mean, I will make these all the time. They're reasonably thin. I use about 4 or 5, I think maybe 5 or 6 pages on one journal. And as you can see, they are very busy with the background, but you can always paint over it if you choose. You don't have to keep the background the way it is, but it is a really great starting off point, I think, having the background that we've created. And so you can, paint on top of it, no problem. This was the original background, and then I painted this girl on top of it. But you can also, which is something I've been doing a lot lately, is just taking some of my photographs. I have started printing up my photographs lately because I feel like I'm losing all of my photos. And so this journal is just about flowers that I received that were just so beautiful, and I wanted to capture them, and I just placed them directly into my journal. And here's another one. And honestly, like I said, these are so fast and easy to make that you will make a stack of monoprints, and then within 5 minutes, you're going to have a journal, and I'm going to show you how. Okay. All right. So what I like to do is not even measure, okay? So I'm going to take my monoprint, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to use that brayer again just to get a nice crease. And then I'm going to fold it in the other direction. The first time I made them, I was measuring and I said, okay, that's not really necessary. And even though I'm using this size of cardstock, it really doesn't matter what size of paper or substrate you're using. And I'll show you, here's a little itty bitty journal I created. And it was with some scrap monoprints that I had. And I ended up just adding some gold acrylic paint for the edges. Okay. So you can make these any size that you like. And the only thing you have to do is cut one side with a pair of scissors. Okay. And you know where to stop, right at the center, because you have that line, that guide of where you folded the page. Okay. And then you're just going to fold it in half, and you're left with this Y shape. And then you're going to take the two Ys and you're going to bring them forward. And I'm just creasing those pages again. So I'm left with this page on this side, these two pages in the center, and a page in the back. Okay, so here I've cut that slip. I'm going to fold it over, take my Y, and like I said, normally I will make about 5 or 6 of these for one journal. And the next step is I like to round the corners. This is totally just preference. If you really wanted to measure, you could take something, you know, like one of my ink bottles here, and you can use that to create a corner that's a little neater if you wanted to do that. But I normally cut the first one, and then I use this one as a template for my other ones. Oh, first I got to make sure it's facing in the right direction. Yes, it is. Yes, I've done that. I've cut it on the wrong side. And I am a very impatient person. And so today we're going to be using double tack dry adhesive film to adhere these pages together. And I'll admit, double tack is probably the most used adhesive that I use here in my studio. It's a strong adhesive, and I don't have to wait for anything to dry, which is wonderful.
And Kat,
Yeah.
what are the dimensions of your cardstock? Is it 8.5 by 11?
Yes.
Thank you.
And so if you're not familiar with double tack, It is basically a sheet of adhesive, and it has a protective layer on both the front and the back. And like I said, it's a very strong one, which is why I use only this one. And I don't necessarily need a lot for my journal. So I'm just going to cut this into strips for now. You can decide how much adhesive you want to use, but honestly, it's pretty strong. It doesn't need a lot. And one of the other things that I like about this product is that you can cut it into any shape that you want. It's from Graphics Arts, and it's called Double Tack Dry Adhesive Film. And so the first thing I'm going to adhere is this center page, this page right here, okay? And I don't need a lot of adhesive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold it up, and I'm going to place a piece right here at the edge. I'm just going to round those corners a little bit, just so they're not sticking out. Peel off the one side of the protective layer. And then I'll peel off. My hands have so much paint on them. Peel off the other side. And then I'm just going to fold it over. And now those two pages are stuck together. Okay. And now I want to stick all of my pages together. So I'm going to do the same thing on the front so that I can apply the next one right on top of it. Okay. And the only difference with this one is that instead of the two, instead of the one side just making one strip, I'm actually going to add it to both sides just to make it a little bit stronger, because it is connecting one, one piece to the other. So I want to make sure that they are adhered properly. And I'm just going to remove the excess. And what I like to do is I don't like to just kind of plop it on there. I like to take my fingers on my left hand and just use it as a guide to make sure that they are aligned properly. And then I press it down. Oops, I forgot to add adhesive to this one. Now, the journals that I created, some of them have designs on the front cover, and some of them don't. If you decide that you add let's say five mono prints to your book and to your journal, and you want to design a cover, you can even take your book to the mono printing plate like this, and then you can mono print directly on it, or you can make your own design. Okay, so this right here, this part right here on the top, that was a mono print that I created while the book was already assembled. So I just took it, and this is the back side of it, and then I just placed it onto my mono printing plate. Or, as I mentioned before, you can just paint directly on it. And this is another mono print on the front, okay? And as you notice, this is an option. This black tape right here, it's actually called gaffer's tape. I think it's an electrical tape. And let me show you. This is what it looks like. It is a flat matte adhesive tape. It's totally optional. Honestly, the adhesive is strong, but I like it more for the look because it's nice and flat and matte. And so it allows me to write on there, what the journal is and everything. So I kind of like using it, but it's an option. You don't necessarily have to use it. It's not going to hold your book together. And so these are some pages that I created earlier. And so you can see what some of the pages would look like. But again, you can fill these journals up with collage, images, you can paint on them. There's just so much, that you can place in there. If you actually wanted to do some journaling, you can even place a piece of lined paper in there. So these journals are a great way to use your monoprinting pages, your big stack of monoprinting pages that you will accumulate when you start playing. And so that is really how I make this little journal. It's really basic, really simple. And what I like to do as well is to just add a hole to the front and the back. For example, right here, to the front and to the back. And then I just fed a piece of sari ribbon and tied it together just to use as a closure. But that's totally optional. You can use whatever you have on hand. This is a journal that I was working on. And like I said, you can paint right in there. Even though you have this busy background, you can still paint on that, paint in there. I think it just adds character to the pages. Okay. And so that's how I make my journals, my little itty bitty, simple and simply bound journals using my monoprints. But I have some favorite monoprinting techniques. And if you guys want, I can most definitely share some of my favorite things that I've kind of discovered over the years.
That sounds great, Kat. Quick question about your journals. Do you sell
Yeah,
them?
I do not know. I don't, because they're just so easy to make. I mean, you guys can make them.
And what about making large journals? Have you ever done the same process with really large pieces of paper?
I have not, but I'm sure it would be just as easy. I think that one of the nice things, again, about using the double tack is that it does come in these large sheets, and so I think making a large journal would be, would be fun. Sure.
And did it take you a lot of experimentation with glues and adhesives to find this process that works with the double tack?
As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a mixed media artist, and so yeah, I have gone through quite a few adhesives and products. Another product that I enjoy is called Artist Tack, which is also a dry adhesive. But for me, using double tack, honestly, it is strong, and that's what I like about it. And so, do I use liquid adhesives? Absolutely. But 90% of the time, I end up using this dry one.
Great recommendation. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, and so I wanted to just share when it comes to mono printing, I have the worst memory ever. Okay. And so what I started doing is I've kept this mono printing ideas journal. And so every time a mono printing idea comes up, I put it in here so that I don't forget, because I will forget. And so I ended up putting some of my favorite ideas in here, and I will share just a couple with you today so that if you are thinking about mono printing, or if you already have started mono printing, maybe these will be some ideas to help you and to give you some inspiration. Now, the first one is something that I actually just found out. Okay. I watched a video on YouTube. And if you follow me on Instagram, I talked about it and I added the link of the lady that did this technique because it just blew my mind. And so basically what she did was when you use a dark acrylic paint on your mono printing plate, you can create a transfer using a magazine image, and it's absolutely stunning. But what she did is she actually used wrapping paper, and I have a lot of wrapping paper, so I was very surprised to hear this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some white paper, some white cardstock, and I'm just going to use some black. This is the oxide black from my set. And I'm going to use this wrapping paper exactly like an image transfer. I'm sorry, I don't know the lady's name, but if you follow me on Instagram, it's on my Instagram feed. And so you just need to add a very light coat of acrylic paint. I'm using black just so that you guys can really get, you guys can see it. Now, I will say that not all all wrapping paper is created equal, because I tested the wrapping paper that I have here at home, but I also purchased some at home. Look at that. I purchased some on Amazon, and what I found to be true was that the wrapping paper that is double-sided does not work as well as just the one-sided wrapping paper. And that is, it's a little messy because I didn't press evenly, but it's a really nice transfer. And so I'm going to let that sit for just a sec. I'm just going to clean my brayer. And because I'm using that white cardstock, again, I'm not really paying attention to what uh, opacity paint I'm using. And when I watched this video, I'll be honest, it was immediate. I started looking for my wrapping paper and my stash of wrapping paper, and I said, "Whoa, I got a lot of this stuff. I need to test this out." And yeah, it really, for the most part, worked beautifully, except for, like I said, that double-sided wrapping paper. Yum, yum. Makes me want some oranges or lemons. And you can see how the monoprint picks up all of that grunginess from the layers underneath it. If that's not your thing, it's okay. Just clean your plate in between sessions. But I just love how grungy that looks. And I'm taking a thing of wrapping paper and I'm making a monoprint out of it. And I think that's pretty cool. All right. Now, another option, something else that I recently found in my local craft store, is that I am always, always, always looking for textures to use on my monoprinting plate. And in order to do that, I have to go down the aisles that are not for paper crafts, or, I'll go down the baking department or the polymer clay department and the clearance department. And so I found these texture plates in the clearance bin, and they were three of them for $6. Anything can create texture on your plate. And what I really liked about these polymer clay textures was that they were double-sided. So I was paying $3 for 6 different designs.
And Kat, did you mention
Yeah.
the image transfer? You mentioned the image transfer could be done with magazine or newspaper clippings. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I'll do that one next, just to show you, because what I really love when I use magazines to make a transfer, it's a pretty cool result. But like wrapping paper, not all magazines are created equal. And so what I would actually suggest is that when you are attempting to make a transfer, test the magazine out, see if it works. If it doesn't, move on to a different brand, because not all of them work. I found that Vogue, like an old issue of Vogue will work. Some old issues of Mademoiselle will work, things like that. And so I tend to stick with the ones that work. Okay. So what I'm going to do to make that transfer, just like the wrapping paper, I'm going to take a nice thin, uh-oh, I am throwing things, nice thin coat of acrylic paint. Again, I'm using the black just so that you guys can see it. It's a very thin layer. Image face down. And I'm going to take one of my scrap pieces of paper and just pick up the excess. I keep going back and forth. I want to see where that excess paint is. I'm not being super neat about it. I don't know if you guys can see her there. And normally I pick images that are high in contrast, you know, like a black and a white, some nice contrast. Those images work really well. And I'm just going to clean up this image just a little bit so that I can actually add some additional elements to this monoprint. So I'm just using a baby wipe. I'm not looking for perfection. And if you want it to be neater, of course, take your time. Right now I'm rushing, so. All right, so now I have the rest of my plate open to add additional elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back my palette. And I'm going to pick out some colors to use here. And I'm going to add some texture using some of the stuff that I have here, like these polymer plates that I told you. You can use rubber stamps. You can use foam stamps. I'm just adding additional texture around my image. Now I'm going to take one of my foam stamps. I'm going to mix it on my palette with this other color. One more. Okay. And you can even use little rubber stamp. These are like the polymer clay, not polymer clay, the clear ones that you can use. I also use these with Amsterdam acrylics. But like the foam stamps, I make sure that I clean my image. I clean my stamp when I'm done playing. Okay, it looks like we need something right there. All right, so now it's full of stuff, right? So now I want to pull this print, and I'm going to pick a color. Actually, I need to let that dry just a little bit. Let me get this lid. But you can use everything and anything that you have to make texture on your plates, on your prints. Okay, let's see how that works. And I think I want her to stand out a little bit, so I think I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use a carmine. Let's see how that works. And I'm also going to use a smaller brayer just because I want to try to keep her shape with the red. Now your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but that is part of having fun, right? Part of playing and being creative. Now let's give that. I'm doing double duty here. I'm cleaning my brayers while also adding pressure. All right, not bad. It's a little all over the place, but she's the nice, she really stands out. And there's a lot of elements going on. Now, what I would probably do is finishing off this piece with adding, some white splatters or something a little lighter. But I'm happy with it. I think there's a lot of texture to look at, and I think it looks great. So, does anybody have any questions?
That was very cool, that print, Cat. Very punk rock.
Hey, punk rock.
Well, there's a question about timing and how long the paint needs to dry before making the print while it's on the jelly plate. Any idea? Like, or does it matter? Or
Yeah, I mean, if you are adding one layer of acrylic paint, and for example, I added my image, and then I started adding all of the elements around it. And, you can do all of that at the same time. But before you pull your print, before you add that final layer of acrylic paint, you want to make sure that that first layer is dry. And today I'm having luck with how quickly my paint is drying. It's pretty dry in here, and so my paint is drying really quickly. But if it wasn't dry and I added another layer on top of it, then all of my colors would start to mix and blend and become muddy, which did happen in here a little bit. But what I would suggest is it really doesn't take long. The thinner, the less paint you use, the quicker it's going to dry. And so it shouldn't take very long for it to dry, but you do want to make sure that it is dry so that your colors do not mix and turn muddy.
thank you, Kat. And
Mhm.
can you use photographs for image transfers?
You can use photographs if you print them on a laser printer. So if you take a regular a photograph that has been printed on photo paper, that will not work. Okay, so but if you have a digital image that you print onto a laser piece of paper, that will work. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, there's definitely, you can spend a lot of time playing with your monoprinting plate. I think for me, one of the important lessons for today was really understanding the paints that I was using and helping you guys, especially if you are using multicolored papers, because I think that it really opens up the world of monoprinting when you step away from white for a while. And I'm not saying completely. I'm saying, branch out and test whatever else you have in your studio. I also like to use pastels, and so I have a lot of toned paper in my house, in my studio, and so I'll use that toned paper, and that toned paper can be like an orange or a brown or a blue. and I'll use anything and everything that is reasonably flat. And it's a great way of experimenting, and white will always be there, but branching out and trying other substrates and knowing how the opacity level of your acrylic paints is very helpful when you are in the middle of creating. So I hope you guys enjoyed the demo.
The demo was awesome. It was playful and super fun, Kat. Really inspiring. Love having you here with us today.
Thank
Uh,
you so much.
and like I'm just scoping here. Everything's happening so fast with the questions and everything. I want to just make sure that that we got them all here with everyone. Oh, question. One more
Yeah.
question before you go.
Yeah.
Have you ever worn out a jelly plate? They're reusable, but has this ever happened? You do a lot of prints.
I do. And the answer is no. The only thing that I've never worn it out. Like, it does not deteriorate. It does not lose its shape. But you still have to be careful when you are using something that's sharp. And so I think one time I was using a like an awl or something, and I just scratched along the paper, and so I ended up having a scratch on my plate. But otherwise, I have been using the same plates for years now. I mean, it's been a long time, and they don't deteriorate, which is great. And even like you can see, this one has this yellow hue to the plate itself because of all of the use that I've been that I use. But it really does not change the function of the plate itself just because it's a little discolored. And trust me when I say I love to experiment. So I have used a lot of different mediums on a monoprinting plate, and it's fun experimenting. I think I mentioned in the beginning that the viscosity of Amsterdam acrylic paints is what really drew me into this arena of monoprinting, because it was just so buttery smooth, and being able to roll it out onto this plate is pretty fun and awesome. And so yeah, there's just a lot that you can do, and you can spend a lot of time playing and end up, like I said before, with a huge stack of monoprints.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kat, for that information. It's
You're welcome.
really appreciated. We really appreciate you, everyone out there. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. I hope to see you again in the future, and that you have a creative day.
Thank you, guys. Oh my goodness.